Before history learned how to write itself, before empires learned how to remember their victories, there were minds that bent the world quietly, shaping stone, stars, and stories. They left behind whispers instead of monuments. Tonight, we step into that shadowed inheritance, where genius was feared, where vision became heresy, and where brilliance often vanished beneath ash, water, and deliberate forgetting. Power has always preferred obedience over understanding. The greatest threat to authority has never been violence, but knowledge that refuses to disappear. Knowledge that waits patiently beneath ruins, encoded in myths, maps, and silence through forgotten ages. Across deserts drowned by time and jungles sealed by regrowth, ancient legends describe teachers who arrived after disasters, rebuilding civilizations with mathematics, astronomy, and engineering so precise it still unsettles modern scholars. From stone cities aligned with solstices to oral histories recalling floods, fire, and sudden climate shifts, they suggest cycles of collapse humanity barely acknowledges, because acknowledging them would mean admitting that progress is fragile, that knowledge can be lost, and that entire worlds have risen and fallen before our own, leaving behind fragmented stories that sound like fantasy only because we have forgotten how real they once were. Ancient maps, dismissed for centuries as decorative nonsense, show coastlines beneath ice, rivers where deserts now burn, and continents arranged as if surveyed from impossible heights. This raises uncomfortable questions about who measured the world when glaciers still ruled it, and how such knowledge survived catastrophe. It was preserved in monasteries, temples, and forbidden libraries, copied by hands that understood their danger. Because maps are declarations of awareness, and awareness undermines control. This is why so many charts vanished, rewritten to suit kings, churches, and empires eager to place themselves at the center of existence while erasing inconvenient truths from memory forever. Within forbidden texts, burned or buried when regimes changed, are hints of machines powered by water, sound, and sunlight, of medical knowledge erased by superstition, and of philosophical systems teaching balance rather than domination. These ideas were too destabilizing for hierarchies built on fear. If people understood their environment and themselves deeply enough, they would be harder to rule. Archaeology keeps brushing against these truths, accidentally, uncovering precision cuts in stone, anomalous alloys, and structures that challenge timelines, only to watch funding vanish and conclusions soften under political pressure. Today, satellites, AI, and deep scanning technologies peer beneath forests, oceans, and ice, revealing cities, roads, and patterns that should not exist according to accepted history. This forces a quiet reckoning between what is visible and what is permitted to be believed. Technology is rediscovering what was once known and then hidden. The question is no longer whether these geniuses, villains, and forgotten people existed, but who decides which truths emerge, which remain classified, and how much of our past must stay buried for the present to feel secure. We often think of archaeology as digging up treasures, a story of pure discovery, but the reality is far more complex. Behind every eureka moment, there's a web of negotiations, government permits, and narratives shaped by sponsors. Researchers learn there are unspoken lines you just don't cross. Why? Because the past is political. A single piece of evidence can destabilize borders, challenge national identities, and even shake the foundations of economies. So, artifacts are carefully labeled, dated, and interpreted to fit within an acceptable story. Anomalies, those inconvenient pieces that don't fit, are often dismissed as errors or exceptions. Think about carbon dates that just don't align, or ancient flood layers that seem to span entire continents, or climate records showing sudden, global upheavals that sound suspiciously like the myths and legends our ancestors told. These things challenge the comforting illusion of linear progress that modern society is built on. History isn't just written by the victors. It's actively curated. Some figures weren't just conquerors. They were villains of memory. They burned libraries, erased languages, and rewrote calendars. They understood that destroying a people's history was a more effective form of control than simply defeating them in battle. Survivors without a past are much easier to manage, and what better cover for this destruction than a natural disaster? It was easy to blame floods, droughts, or volcanic winters for collapses that were really fueled by power grabs and resource hoarding. Future generations inherited myths instead of manuals, legends instead of instructions. Religions were even shaped to replace older sciences that once explained the sky, the earth, and humanity's place in the grand cycles of destruction and renewal. But suppression isn't always so dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, academic, and bureaucratic. A controversial site gets reclassified. Access is restricted. A groundbreaking discovery is quietly locked away in a museum basement. Meanwhile, public attention is redirected to safer, more predictable ruins. Brilliant ancient engineers, navigators, and philosophers are reduced to mere footnotes. Acknowledging their advanced knowledge would force us to ask uncomfortable questions. Questions about lost technologies, sustainable civilizations, and whether a global catastrophe has reset humanity before. That idea undermines our sense of modern exceptionalism, our belief that we stand at the peak of history, rather than on another fragile crest, balanced between memory and collapse. Today, technology is breaking the silence. LiDAR peels back jungle canopies, sonar maps drowned coastlines, and AI detects patterns that human bias might miss. They reveal infrastructure built for huge populations, agriculture adapted to changing climates, and cities designed with a long memory of disaster. Yet, even these revelations are filtered. They reach us through media and funding priorities that favor sensationalism over context. The truly transformative ideas are softened, delayed, or buried under entertainment. Because a real paradigm shift threatens careers, institutions, and the national myths we've invested in. The line between genius and villain starts to blur when we realize that forgetting is not always an accident. The most dangerous people might not be warriors, but the gatekeepers of memory, those who decide what humanity is allowed to remember. By controlling the past, they quietly write the future. As we face our own rising seas and unstable climate, the echoes of warnings etched in stone thousands of years ago grow louder. The question isn't just what we've lost, but what we will choose to ignore next. What if the final act of history isn't something that happened in the past, but something unfolding all around us right now? As melting ice reveals ancient coastlines and shifting deserts uncover cities buried for millennia, we're finding something startling. Climate patterns today eerily mirror the collapses recorded in myths we've long dismissed. This forces us to ask, is history a straight line, or a looping warning? Perhaps those forgotten peoples weren't primitives, but survivors. Survivors who carried fragments of incredible knowledge forward after a global catastrophe, hoping someone would eventually listen. They understood that civilizations don't just fall from disaster. They fall from arrogance, from denial, and from refusing to learn from what came before. These are lessons encoded in stone, in story, and in silence itself. In this story, the real geniuses aren't lone inventors. They're the custodians of balance, the architects of systems built to withstand floods, droughts, and social strain. And the villains, they have familiar faces. They are the institutions, the leaders, and the narratives that choose short-term power over long-term memory, because power loves amnesia. Forgetting is always easier than reform. This is why advanced knowledge becomes inconvenient. It gets reframed as myth, as coincidence, or as fringe speculation, even as our own technology starts to confirm it, piece by piece. We're discovering that ancient societies planned for climate shifts we are only now beginning to fear. Their disappearance wasn't a result of ignorance, but perhaps a failure of unity, ethics, and restraint. Failure that seems to be repeating itself today. Modern archaeology is at a crossroads. It has the tools to rewrite history, but it is held back by the same political gravity that buried the truth in the first place. Behind the scenes, researchers quietly admit to anomalies they can't publish. The public stories we're told remain sanitized. Why? Because acknowledging lost golden ages would demand accountability. It would force us to ask why such knowledge was ever allowed to vanish, and whether a similar suppression is shaping our own education, media, and memory. Today, the most unsettling realization is that nothing truly disappears at whose waits, submerged beneath oceans, entombed beneath our own cities, or preserved in stories we call fantasy. It waits until the conditions are right for remembrance. As artificial intelligence begins to reconstruct shattered texts and map hidden patterns across continents, humanity faces a choice: humility or repetition. Will we learn from erased civilizations, or will we join them? Technology alone can't save a society. Wisdom does. And wisdom requires confronting uncomfortable truths about how often brilliance is silenced, how often warnings are ignored, and how willingly we trade real understanding for the illusion of stability and control. As we look at ruins both ancient and modern, at cracking glaciers and glowing data streams, one question echoes through time. If everything that was forgotten is now being found, and if every collapse left instructions written in myth and stone, then maybe the real danger isn't what was lost. The real danger is whether we will choose, once again, to forget. History doesn't have to repeat itself, but it will, patiently and relentlessly, until remembering becomes more powerful than our fear, and the silence we inherited finally speaks too loudly to ignore. Thanks for watching.